Hello, everybody. Welcome to another developer interview. I like that I can do these now. It makes me super happy. Joined today by Tim Keenan, developer of Duskers. Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I can't complain. I'm finally not sick anymore. That was terrible the last week and a half.
Yeah, that's kind of like a winter thing. I'm sort of just getting over something myself.
Yeah, and you were down near Vancouver, so you probably had something similar to what I had. It was terrible. I was dead for at least a week. It was absolutely insane. I couldn't talk, couldn't make videos. I didn't know what to do with myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always fun. I found that when I was a kid, I bounced back from things like I have a daughter that's 5 and she'll get sick and she'll be like really sick for about 12 hours and she'll be totally fine, and me, I get like a cold and like at least a week, you know, if I recover from anything.
See, that was always me, though. Whenever I was a kid, and even up till now, if I get sick, I'll get sick once a year, but it'll be like for 3 weeks at a time. And it'll be the worst
Right.
thing in the world.
That was never me, and now it is. Now it's like whenever I get sick, I'm like, at least I'm mentally braced for it now. I'm like, this is gonna be this way for like at least a week, if not three.
Yeah, and everyone's got their own, they've all got their own, like, system and how they deal with it and everything, too. You're like, okay, I know exactly what I need to do. Leave me alone. I'm gonna be okay. Just give me a
Right.
week.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
it's hard, especially when you're doing like your own thing, right? Because it's not like you can just sit there and like pile up your sick days. Like your inbox fills up and all the
yeah,
things that you
exactly.
have to get done.
Luckily, I can do some writing if I have to or anything like that, but it depends what you're doing, obviously.
Right.
Okay, so for anyone who might not be familiar with Duskers, could you just kind of explain what the game is? Because there's probably some people that are watching from my channel that might not have heard of it or played it before, and that's probably going to be the best way to kind of get this started.
Yeah, sure. It's a game where you pilot drones into derelict to try to figure out why everyone is dead. And I guess there's a lot of weird things about it. It has a command line interface. We didn't do music because we felt like that would get the atmosphere in there. Um, you manually pilot these drones, and so you switch between them. So there isn't a whole lot of autonomy, though you can issue commands and chain them and have them automatically do things. But yeah, I mean, basically, it also has a very sci-fi vibe to it, a very kind of retro aesthetic, if you will, like Alien, the first Alien movie, a very kind of late 70s, early 80s kind of grainy look to it. So it also, I guess you could throw it into a sort of horror genre. It's a roguelike. It's sort of a real-time strategy game that plays a lot slower than that. It's kind of a, as you can see, it's hard for me to describe it in a quick, in an easy manner.
Yeah, the comparison I was gonna make was actually like it's like Hackers and Alien combined. Like Hackers, the
Yeah,
old movie, and Alien, and it's super stressful. Is saying like it's kind of horror. Like when my drones die in that game, I get super stressed. It's insane. I feel way too much attachment to them, kind of like XCOM.
that that's a great. That anytime I hear that, that's amazing because I remember early on I was told that I should have them actually be space marines or whatnot because people don't care
Well, people
about
care about
if
drones.
I know. Well, I can understand why they were saying that because at the beginning of the game, you really didn't care about them, I don't think. But then as the game kept going, and we added in, the little beeps, the little call signs that each one gives, we gave them names, they were slightly different. And I think there's something to be said about when you're completely in control of them because and maybe this is morbid, but I always think of it like I told it to be there. I told it to open up the door to navigate to that room. And so if it's getting attacked or bad things are happening, you just kind of it's and it'll just sit there and take it until you tell it to not take it, right? So it's kind of like having a pet or something like that where it just didn't know any better and it's your responsibility.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's something to be said for any game where that happens. I'm thinking like when you're fighting with normal like enemies in a strategy game or with your allies and they die, you don't really care. As soon as you spend time with anything though, you get attached to it, right? When you have that direct control. Like I was playing XCOM 2 earlier because I got the Long War 2 mod and all my soldiers just died in one mission and I was like, "Well, I thought I could take them out, but then they had like reinforcements come in, they just blew up everyone, and now I feel terrible. I had to stop playing the game because I was so sad. So there's
Yeah.
definitely something to be said for it, and
Yeah.
I think Duskers really capitalized on that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was amazing. It's kind of weird because you try. I was watching a talk by like a short soapbox by Robin Hunicke, and she was talking about emotions in games and how, we always attack the very surface emotions, which might be, you know, anger or fear or whatever. And then all of a sudden, like, could you tap into, deeper emotions? And so for this game, I tried to get this sense of isolation. Um, and it's really crazy to me. It's almost like a good and bad thing when I read something like I remember there was a reviewer that said that they had to bounce out to like Facebook or Twitter just to like have another human interaction because they just felt sort of like so alone and isolated. And it's like, wow, I achieved that. And then I'm like, oh wait, I feel kind of bad now.
And that adds to the attachment on your drones as well, because they're your only companions in the game, really.
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. They're the only, and that's why, like, I really hoped when I was developing the game and all the little decisions I was making is that I wanted you to start feeling like they were people and talking to them, and then at the same time realizing in the back of your mind that they have no AI to them. They don't do anything of their own volition, and that you are crazy. That was something I really wanted. And the funny thing is that people get that. Like, I've seen people be like either that they were talking to it or they were acting like it was a person and then being like, wait a minute, this thing is absolutely not like it doesn't do anything on its own unless I tell it to. So that I wanted that. And that's part of isolation, right? When you're like out in space that and it wasn't a very good movie, but I don't think so, but Silent Running, I mean, he had these three little robots and he would talk to them and they became his companions.
So you were mentioning how players will say things and everything. Do you ever have like any favorite stories that players have told you that have happened to them in the game?
Oh yeah, I mean, anytime you hear anybody talking about your game, and I think this is kind of the brilliance of making anything procedurally generated. There were definitely moments in my first game of Virus named Tom when I would hear from somebody about like an epiphany moment because it was a puzzle game that I was leading you through and that they had it, right? But the really cool thing about Duskers being procedurally generated and a roguelike and all that stuff is that they have experiences that I haven't experienced and I didn't intend to. So whenever I watch somebody play on a stream or I hear about the player stories, it kind of breaks my brain sometimes, the things that happen. And it's really cool. And obviously some of them, sometimes it's even outside the game when you hear about someone that was in the hospital for like 2 weeks or something like that and got incredibly depressed, and then they found your game and they started playing it, and then that like helped them through it, and that they spent their time off in another world instead of just being kind of down. And so anytime you can do something like that, because I recognize that in myself, like there have been games that have sort of taken me away, and to make a game like that for someone is just so amazing. Because I don't know, when you're an independent game developer, you're like, my game is small, and I'm not going to make a game that affects someone as much as like Zelda affected me or something like that. And it's not true. I mean, when people find these games and if it resonates with them, then it can really strike them, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's true with every sort of entertainment medium too. I mean, on YouTube as well, if I get a comment saying like, "Hey, I was waiting for your video all day and I finally got it and I'm super happy about it," and everything, like it's very similar feeling and everything. So it is really great whenever anyone gets a comment like that. It's
Yeah,
always
you
good to hear that.
yeah, you kind of forget for a second. Like, I mean, that's why you're sort of making it, and then you get caught up in making it, and then of course it's incredibly competitive out there, and their media is like sort of so disposable now that you sort of, I don't know, it just sort of goes by the wayside, and then someone reminds you, and it's kind of an amazing feeling.
Absolutely. So switching off from players, though, it seems like the general games media really enjoyed the game as well. You got a lot of Game of the Year nominations and awards and all these different things. Were you expecting that at all, and how has that felt for you?
You know what? I really wasn't. I mean, it's really funny, and I kind of go back in my head and try and figure out like what my thought process was. But when we launched, slowly over time, word of mouth really spread the game, and we got all these gushing reviews from like Rock Paper Shotgun, PC Gamer, Wired, Ars Technica. It was like across the board, and it was amazing, right? But somehow in the back of your mind, when there are like about 20 games a day coming out on Steam or something ridiculous like that. So it's something like over 4,000 games or something in 2016, right? So you can't help but think like, well, they said that really nice thing in May, but come December, and I'm not really great about hounding everybody and being, like, oh, remember what you said, and here's this package with, screenshots and all that stuff or whatever. But then all of a sudden, when you get those, when they start rolling in, when someone says that your game was, one of the best games, if not, or the best game of 2016, that like blows your mind. And the fact that those same publications came back out with those end of the year lists and put Duskers in it was like, that was mind blowing. But at the same point in time, I'm like, well, that makes sense because what they wrote in the review was that the game was amazing. But I don't know, you just don't think that it'll stand up because there'll be so many games that come out. I mean, think about the number of games, and you're not just going up against. I mean, sometimes you are because sometimes these are like indie game publications, but I mean, we're sitting there in lists with AAA games like with Doom and stuff like that, and you're just like, I don't know, it's just kind of mind blowing. It was really funny because I got asked one time, like if I felt snubbed because there was some award show or something like that, and Duskers wasn't mentioned or something like that, and I was like, I don't ever expect my games, like I expect them to fly under the radar, right? Like I mean, I could never feel snubbed by anything. So I thought that was really funny, but yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. I thought maybe I hoped that maybe one of those publications would remember us, right?
Hmm.
And it feels like they all did. I feel like again that list I just did with Rock Paper Shotgun, PC Gamer, Wired, whatever. Like they all brought us back into the fold in that um, in that final sort of and like in those last couple weeks. And it's crazy because it's like it all just started when it rains it pours, right? It's just like all of a sudden they all started coming in, and I felt kind of like a goober because I was posting them to my friends and stuff, and and I was trying to do them in like clumps of three or four, and I was just like, am I just being super obnoxious right now? But Jesus Christ, like this is an amazing thing. I don't want to not post, but I just posted like yesterday like a bunch of things, so it's kind of surreal.
Do you think having that connection to the characters in the game, and I know I keep going back to XCOM 2, that wasn't my intention at the start of this or anything, but that was a game that also came out earlier last year, and it also features like you have a big connection to all the characters that you play in that game and that you control, similar to how you control the drones and Duskers. Do you think that that maybe instills a bit of memory and instills a bit more connection than playing a game like Doom or anything like that? Like Doom's a great game, but I don't know if you'd have that same emotional connection that at the end of the year looking back on might not be one of your fondest memories in gaming, and a game like Duskers might be. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, that's a really interesting question. I'm not really sure like how long things resonate. I know for me, it's sort of the same way, right? Like something will I'll like a game, and then at the end of the year, I'll like think of the games that I liked, and then I'll go back through my Steam library, and every now and then I'll be like, oh yeah, that one, right? So it's hard to say. I definitely think that the atmosphere of the game was a huge part of the game's success. Because I mean, I don't get me wrong, I think people love the gameplay, but I think that the atmosphere really drove it home, and then all those things sort of combined into this nougaty center that everyone kind of clings around. So I think for if you're making an indie game, I'm obviously, I mean, we're really fortunate for all the attention that we got. But I mean, I think that definitely being unique as well to stand out from the crowd, which is super ironic because like when we developed this game and I decided to put the command line interface in, I was like, this is insane. Like no one's gonna buy this game, but whatever, we're doing it. And then ironically, the year that I launched, like Hacknet and Quadrilateral Cowboy and Event Zero, it's like they've been jokingly talking about like the year of the command line interface. It's like who knew, right?
Yeah, there's like an entire hacking bundle on Steam I saw earlier. That's kind of insane. I never would have thought that'd be a thing.
Yeah, I know. Well, all of a sudden it started happening, and then all of a sudden we all got together and we're like, why don't we I mean, someone who likes Hacknet might like Duskers, and someone who likes Duskers might like Quadrilateral Cowboy. So there were enough. It's crazy because
Hey,
like I feel like the year before there weren't any.
I think that's great. The more genres we have, the more things that are doing different stuff. Always good to see because it's been way too stagnant too long in the game, in the industry and everything. I just want to see really cool, neat ideas, and I want to see people working together because you just don't see that enough.
Yeah, this is why I sometimes worry when people are trying too hard to prognosticate, like, what's gonna work and what's not,
Like,
because
how
you
do we
wouldn't have said that.
recreate this? And
Yeah, like you wouldn't know unless you try it. I mean, obviously you get a feel, but even me, I mean, when we launched early access, I was like about 2 weeks before, I was like, wow, we've totally failed. If this was gonna catch on, it'd catch on by now. And I was totally wrong. So you never know.
so, what's coming up next for Duskers as a game? Is there going to be continued support in it? Are you planning any major patches, expansions? Duskers 2? Is that going to be a thing? Worldwide
You know,
exclusive.
right. It's always hard because you work on a game, for 3 years, and you go through early access for 9 months, and you're constantly updating the game, and people love that. And then you launch the game, and you patch it with, because there were some bugs or whatever. And then, whoever new comes onto the game, like let's say, today somebody buys Duskers, and then they're like, what's next? Like, here are some ideas. And the notion of like sort of games as a service or continued development, is really cool for some games, but at the end of the day, usually these games don't make so much money that you're like, oh, I can just keep developing it, and the revenue that we're making off of it totally pays for development, right? And not only that, but after 3 years, of working on one thing and so intensely, it's nice to be like, okay, let's take a break. So at the moment, we did do some patches, but at the moment, the development has sort of ceased, as we figure out what we're doing, and as you know we yeah, I mean, just sort of, it's always this juggling thing when you're going from one game to the next. And so what I would love to do is make a sequel, because the game has so much more that you could do with it. But the problem with that is that then you worry, is there an audience there, right? Because is everyone who bought Duskers then going to buy the next one, or is it only going to be a subset of those? You know what I mean? And so that versus a new IP is always an interesting question. But I think what's actually, and I can't really go into too much detail right now, but I do think that there are some game ideas that are percolating that they borrow from Duskers. Like, I think from A Virus Named Tom to Duskers, there wasn't a whole lot of carryover there. Um, but there is a sort of prototype in the works, and who knows what'll work out. But that is borrowing some of the things that we did, I feel, right in Duskers, and trying to do that in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be a spiritual successor on the way, but it's too early to tell.
Ooh, interesting. Getting on to Duskers a little bit more, is there anything that you really wanted to put into the game, but you could just never quite get to work, or you just didn't have the time or the money to do so?
I think that actually I'm really happy with how Duskers turned out. The only things I would have wanted to do was keep going, right? Like the sound design, we threw a lot of stuff in at the end, and we actually had some assets that we didn't throw in because I was just too worried toward the end of the game that it could mess with things, because it's such a delicate balance of when you have so many systems interacting, on a game like that. But with the sound design, and with just the level of polish, and with adding some more upgrades, and refining more of the things that can go wrong in the events and stuff like that, just kind of continuing to polish it and make it even slicker. But you definitely get to a point when you're developing a game where you're like, we have to draw a line somewhere, or else we'll just keep going forever. So that's what we had to do.
I think that's pretty good to hear, though, because a lot of the time nowadays you see a lot of developers that try to offer the world, and you end up in situations where they can't. Things are underdeveloped and everything. Getting a game that does what it does very well is really kind of a treat nowadays, and it's good to see.
Mhm. Oh, that's really great to hear, because I mean, even that game, which is smaller by some standards, and yeah, definitely tackling a thing that it does, but even that took 3 years. So, I mean, That's what I try to do. I try and sit there and find the core of the game and say, all right, what everything else is superfluous to this core, and then make a game that does that thing really, really well, and then polish it, right? So, and you're right. Like I have a lot of friends, and they've been on projects that just last so long, or the game feels like it's trying to do too many things. I mean, film does this. So many things when you're like, you can realize that they were excited and they were just trying to throw so many things in there. And I get it because I do it too. But so important in the design process is throwing a bunch of things in and then removing things and really understanding what your game is. And actually, I'm I rarely submit talks to GDC because it's just hard to get in and it takes time. But I did this year and it got in, so I'm excited about that. And I'm going to go over the weird process that we had in Duskers and how to design it. So I'm kind of excited to see the reaction to other developers that think I'm crazy or they think that that makes sense.
I think the crazy developers are usually the best ones, though.
It could be. It could be. Yeah, we had a really weird. Most of the time, like you'll sit there in a traditional design process. You'll have all these design pillars that you lay out and you figure everything out, and then you make the game. And what we did was we kind of developed them along the way. But we really, really focused everything on them. And then we also made it that they, instead of being like features, it was like emotions. Like I said, everything in the game started going toward feeling isolated, and all these decisions, like having a command line, having these drones instead of people, having, you know, this no one alive in the story and, having these creepy, slow scenes, like it all goes toward that feeling. And I wouldn't have started the game and been like at the beginning with a design doc being like, oh, isolation, that's what I want to do. It just, as we started making the game, it became more and more apparent that that made sense, you know?
Absolutely. So I was doing some research earlier, and I was going through the different forums and everything, the community page on Steam, and people were asking about mod support. Is that something you ever considered to put into the game or anything?
Oh, we definitely did. We wanted to, and I think it could make it's so much fun, but that's something that you really have to sort of plan out. And I looked into it briefly when we were in the middle of development, and I don't know if this has changed, but it was basically looking like because we made the game in Unity that wasn't a super easy thing to do, um, and not only that, but then like I said, like as you're at the end of development, you're trying to get all the sounds and you're trying to do all this stuff, like the whole mod support thing. And I watched a talk from the guys that did Arc, and they kind of explained the pluses and minuses, and it seems amazing to have a community that could like augment your game in ways that you couldn't anticipate. So I'd love to do that on a future game, but with Duskers, we just didn't have the time or the know-how because I've never done that before.
Yeah, absolutely. So, getting back to future games and stuff, and I know you've got maybe a couple ideas floating around. Do you have like a pipe dream project that you want to work on someday? Like, what is your ideal game that if you had all the money in the world, what would you make?
See, that's an interesting question because there's probably like five games, that I would probably try to make if I, had all the money in the world. I was always kind of interested in making games that have a real emotional impact on people, um, and they could really take something away. So I used to have this notion of this game whereby it might have been a little bit morbid, but there are all these people there. You're in the ER of a hospital because someone that you love is there. And so at night you just kind of, or even during the day, because it just kind of gets, and if you've ever been waiting for a loved one, you turn into a zombie, just kind of going around and finding people that either don't have someone or whatever, and somehow going into their world and understanding them, and then using that like almost as a way of giving them either bringing them back if they're really depressed or whatever, or helping them pass to the next life or whatnot. And I always thought that would be like kind of something that could be really you could really say a lot with a game like that. But whether or not it's really hard when you're doing something like that, not coming across as either preachy or melodramatic or anything like that. But I think that that would be a really ripe subject matter for me, where I think that would be really cool. But it's sort of it's very nebulous, and so it'd be very difficult to just be like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And also, it would probably require a lot of exploration and experimentation and stuff like that. So I don't think it would be something where it's like, okay, we're pushing the hardware so hard, but it would be more like, all right, we're just finding our way through these woods.
Definitely. That sounds like I'm not going to pretend I'd understand anything like that, but it sounds like very ambitious. Interesting though. I mean, we saw games that were kind of tackling heavier subjects are getting more attention nowadays, things like that Dragon Cancer and everything.
Mhm.
So it seems
Yeah,
like nowadays it might be more viable than ever.
yeah, I think it definitely is. And I think that for me, and I have no problem, with, the term walking simulator, and well, I don't love the term, but I have no problem with those games. I love those games. But for me, I would probably, just because I'm such a design nerd and I love gameplay systems and I'm now falling in love with player stories. Even if I made a game like that, I would want it to somehow be that it still felt very much like there was gameplay involved, and that somehow your story might be different than other people's.
Absolutely. All right. So I had a couple other questions, but we kind of covered them in the different questions as we went throughout this. So is there anything else you'd like to add in before we end it off here?
No, it's always fun talking to you, so thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks. I try to be super fun. That was terrible. Okay. This has been Tim Keenan. Where can they go find you if they want to follow up, and where can they go get Duskers and all that good stuff?
Okay, yeah, so the company name is Misfits Attic, and I always use that under everything. So that's what I am on Twitter, and that's what I am on, you know, that's our Facebook page. But I think if you did Tim Keenan Duskers, or even just Duskers, you could find me. And Duskers is on Steam and GOG and the Humble Store.
Absolutely, and you can find links to pretty much all that in the description as well. I would like to thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Always good to have you and every other guest that I have. I love it every single time. And I am Patty Jack. We'll see you next time.